Good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me well. I am Brianella Scott, and I am a newly qualified solicitor at Harper MacLeod and a non-executive committee member of the Scottish Young Lawyers Association. Before we get started, can I ask that for the first portion of the event, you keep your cameras off and your microphones on mute so that only the speakers have their cameras and microphones on. You may also wish to select the focus view for your screen, meaning that you can see your speakers more clearly. The session today is going to be recorded and it will be available on our website after the event. In terms of the agenda for this evening, first we will undertake a panel discussion, which will run for approximately 45 minutes. Following the panel discussion, there will be an opportunity to pose questions to our panelists via the Q&A function or the chat box function, and we will get to these at the end of the event. On behalf of the Scottish Young Lawyers Association, welcome and thank you all for joining us for the first of our two-part series focusing on diversity and inclusion within the Scottish legal profession, more specifically, the inclusion of minority ethnic solicitors. Tonight, we will be lending our focus to race and ethnicity, access to the profession, as it relates to schools, universities, work experience, and the very elusive training contract. We are very keen for those in attendance to contribute to this discussion, and we hope that together we can agree actions that will assist in facilitating change within the profession. Our 6 panelists are expertly placed to speak to this topic, as is our chair, Usman Tariq, who we are delighted to have with us today. Usman is the co-founder of the Scottish Ethnic Minority Lawyers Association, or SEMLA, which aims to improve ethnic diversity, within the legal profession in Scotland. He is also an advocate at the Scottish Bar and a member of Ampersand Advocates and the Faculty of Advocates. Usman is also on the Scotland Leadership Group of Mosaic Network, which is a member mentoring initiative for disadvantaged young people from an ethnic minority background. Only just yesterday, Usman was reappointed as a standing junior counsel to the UK government. He was recognized as Advocate of the Year at the Law Awards in 2017 and the Legal 500 Junior Counsel of the Year Award at the Scottish Bar at the Legal 500 UK Awards in 2019, as well as being shortlisted again last year in 2020. Usman has appeared at all levels of the Scottish court system, from the Scottish Sheriff Court to the UK Supreme Court. He has substantial tribunal experience, including appearing in the Scottish Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal and the UK Intellectual Property Office. Without further ado, I will now pass you on to Usman.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Brianella. As some of you may know, it was mentoring on the diploma at Glasgow and meeting students from an ethnic minority background who were struggling to secure traineeships, which was the spark in my mind, the inspiration that led to creating SEMLA. That was back in 2016 when that concept started to come together. And I'm so glad that we're now at the stage in the legal profession in Scotland where we're having open and candid discussions around the issues of race and ethnicity in the profession, both in terms of access and progression. And the credit really goes to the SYLA for organising an event of this nature. The topic of this roundtable is going to be issues around access into the profession. And at least for my mind, that's one of the biggest issues facing ethnic minority lawyers in the profession. And I'm delighted to welcome our panelists this evening who come from a variety of backgrounds and bring different perspectives to the conversation. I'm going to introduce our panel before we move on to the discussion. If you have any questions, please just type them into the chat box and I will try and pick them up as we go along, but don't worry if I don't, because we have a period allocated towards the end for us to go through those questions. So without taking up too much time, let me introduce our panel. We have Tatora Mukushi. Tatora, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
Hi. And Tatora is a solicitor and he's a convener of the Law Society of Scotland's Racial Inclusion Group. We also have Amna Amin. Amna, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone.
Amna is an associate at Kennedy's and she is a SYLA committee member. We have Elaine McGlone. Elaine, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Elaine is the Equality and Diversity Manager at the Law Society of Scotland. We also have Kerry Truburn. Kerry, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone.
Kerry is the Director at the University of Glasgow's Diploma in Professional Legal Practice. We also have Lynette Maturi. Lynette, do you want to say hello?
Hello.
And Lynette is a graduate of the University of Dundee. And do we have Emma at the moment or not? No, we have one other panelist who I think has been held up in something else. So if when Emma joins, I will make an introduction. So if I could ask all the panelists to come off mute for the discussion. And I'm going to start off with quite an open question just to try and frame the discussion. And if you, I'm happy for whoever on the panel wants to take this question to start the conversation. And the question is this: what do you think are the biggest challenges for law students from an ethnic minority background to access the legal profession in Scotland? Who wants to start with that question?
I can start. I was waiting if someone else wanted to start, but I'm happy to start. Thanks for the great question. So I would think there's a lot of factors in terms of challenges that ethnic minority students face. I think the first one is unconscious bias. You know, that's present within the recruitment process when you go for an interview panel, as well as the HR departments. I also think there's a lack of direct support available to minority students within university. I also think there's a lack of representation within law fairs. You know, for example, when I went to law fairs, I see nobody that perhaps looked like me, and that's the very beginning of a student's journey into the legal career. And I feel that if we don't have a diverse panel within law fairs, then that's where students feel the disconnect between the legal profession and themselves.
Lynette, you're a recent graduate, so you're at that stage. What's your perspective on that question?
I would agree with the points that Amina has brought up in terms of representation, but also in terms of mentorship and knowing someone within the profession who you can turn to, for example, to have some insight in where you are, or just to ask those silly questions. It seems, from my perspective, a lot of young lawyers, aspiring lawyers, they're almost feel like they're charting on, they're treading uncharted waters. For them, it's them going on ahead and then making connections by themselves. So I think that is something that they are at a disadvantage for. As well, I would again highlight Amina's point about law fairs, etc., in terms of who is represented. But I think that point needs to be handled carefully. It's not a matter of including lawyers from ethnic minorities while excluding lawyers who aren't from ethnic minorities. I think we're at the stage in the Scottish legal profession where there's more than the capacity for more lawyers. So it doesn't mean that there'll be fewer lawyers brought on, just a wider range and more perspective. So I think that needs to be handled delicately. It's not a loss, it's an addition. So that's part of my perspective.
I'd like to pick up on a couple of points you've mentioned, Lynette, but before I move on to those, is there anybody else from the panel that wants to come in terms of their views and what the biggest challenges are for ethnic minority students to access the profession?
I think I would just, oh, sorry, Elaine.
Oh, no, on you go.
Thanks. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for having me and inviting me onto this panel. I want to say that I'm very much here to listen and learn, obviously on behalf of the University of Glasgow, but I suppose on behalf of all universities. And if there are things I can take back and pass on as we go through this discussion, then I absolutely will do so. And some of what's been mentioned already, I think, is really interesting. So I suppose I just wanted to echo what Amina and Lynette have said. Is just perhaps that idea of quite an elite legal profession and that feeling, I suppose, for people of entering into that. And as Lynette said, treading uncharted waters. And I'm really interested to hear from everyone what we can and should be doing to try and remedy that as far as we possibly can. Thanks, Usman.
Elaine?
I would just echo what Kerry's just said. I'm here to listen and learn as well. You know, I'm hearing from the experiences of people who are, have the lived experience. So that I will be taking those factors back to and it'll help me in my work. One thing that maybe a point to make is that there's a multitude of different ethnicities and in fact so many individuals that you know, everyone's different. Everyone's got a different sort of background, factors in their lives which are affecting their decisions. So I think thinking about people as individuals and thinking, you know, not making a stereotypical assumption is really important, I think. You know, schools possibly are making assumptions about particular students. They're making, students maybe are making assumptions about what being a lawyer's like and maybe assuming that they're not welcome. So these are all sort of factors I would say are maybe challenges that we need to look at.
I just wanted to pick up a couple of points that have arisen around mentorship, having role models right from the beginning of the journey into the legal profession. And this is, I think, particularly a question for, I'd like to ask Lynette, Tatora and Amina first because of their lived experiences. Did you have, and I'll start with Lynette first of all, because you're the most recent graduate here. And one of the things I'm really conscious of with my work with SEMLA is that there is a real visible lack of Black role models in the legal profession in Scotland. We often like to collectively group together all minorities as one group. But what you'll often see is that there are, for instance, senior lawyers in the profession from, say, an Asian background. But I really struggle to see senior lawyers in the profession from a Black background. So I just wanted to ask Lynette, when you were studying, who were your role models in the legal profession, or did you not have any?
I think I'd approach that question in two strands, okay? The first strand I would speak about is my personal role models within the profession. And the second I'd speak about is in general. So as an aspiring solicitor, my personal role model was a Kenyan solicitor who came to do a master's in the University of Aberdeen, and I grew up in Aberdeen. So I met her through that, and she was my inspiration. But then she went back to practice in Kenya at her law practice. So there was my role model and moved back to Kenya. So apart from her, I would say, no, I did not have a direct role model. But in terms of what I, as a aspiring solicitor, was looking for, I was not looking for a Black role model. And that might sound quite unusual or, not expected. Here are my reasons. First of all, I do not ascribe to the designation of being Black. I never have, and I never will. And I say that quite firmly because when we speak about diversity, we have very different terms which then set the stage for where we're moving and what the discussion is about, right? So for example, Usman, you said that you had Asian role models higher in the profession. I'm not looking for Black role models. I'm looking from African role models within the profession. Do you see the difference in what I'm speaking about? Am I getting that across?
Yes, I understand that point, yes.
Mm-hmm. And why this is so important to me personally is because it needs to be understood and it needs to be championed that Black and white, let me take it back a step. So we had a children's song. This might seem like a tangent, but I'm going somewhere with this. We had a children's song where it was red, yellow, black, and white, right? And if anybody knows that song, it's a very old hymn, a children's hymn. But in this day and age, we no longer call people red. We no longer call them yellow, right? And that is the right thing. So to keep on perpetuating that somebody is a color or perpetuating that, I think that brings us back. It dehumanizes people. My experience as an African lawyer or aspiring lawyer of African heritage would be different from somebody of African heritage who lives in Japan, etc. It doesn't mean that because our skin color is the same, we have the same experiences. So that is really what I would really champion. Let the Scottish legal system be a place where people are human. And then that's where the diversity and the assumptions that that Elaine was speaking about, when we stick to these labels which have no basis. I often joke to my friends, I've never met a Black person. And I've traveled quite a lot. And when I go to Kenya and they ask me, what's racism like there? How do white people treat you there? I tell them, what? I've never met a white person, so I couldn't tell you how they treat me. I mean, I've met Scots. I've met Asian Scots, Bangladeshi Scots. I've met English Scots. But I've never met a white person. So I think in that we are rooting ourselves in assumptions, in descriptions that are just fallacies. So in that, I would say, I am looking for personally an African solicitor to be a role model, which I never had.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great point, Lynette, and something that often we all fall into that trap. You'll have seen, for instance, the acronym that's often thrown around, BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. And I completely see your point, which is, why is Black used as a color, whereas, for instance, Asian and other groups are not, they're not referred to by the color of their skin. The other point, I think there's some feedback. Is there some, could I ask everybody that's not on the panel just to go on mute? The other interesting point is, you'll have seen, for instance, around Black History Month, but Black history, it differs depending on the lived experience of where you grew up. I wanted to move on just to Tatora, and then I'll come to Amna as well in terms of role models when you were studying law. Tatora, I know you studied in England and Scotland, is that right?
I studied in England and I qualified in England first, and then I re-qualified in Scotland, although without very much study. Sorry, I hope everyone can still hear me. It's quite interesting the point Lynette made, because I'm of African heritage. Not only that, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and my father was a lawyer in Zimbabwe. He had his own firm. In fact, he was one of the first Black lawyers to have a firm in Zimbabwe. And the dynamic of being a Black lawyer in a country that is majority Black, right now is virtually, it's negligible. But at the time, it was, it literally was the cutting edge. You know, you could very easily be a pioneer as a Black lawyer in a quite similar way to what you could be here. There's obviously an enormous political backdrop that sort of comes with that, and a lot of sort of baggage that comes with that. But he would have had no Black role models who were qualified lawyers who were practicing law, certainly not in the way we think of practicing law nowadays. Yeah, his law was very much tied up with the liberation struggle. So when I think of my role models, I think of my father, because he is, you know, he's very clearly the only lawyer who I saw day in, day out going to work and, you know, being a lawyer. I think of the people who I knew who were on the bench in Zimbabwe, who were all white at the time, and, you know, gradually there was a change. So understanding, you know, being aware of the racial dynamics, of the differences. I have always been aware, but in a slightly topsy-turvy way. I never thought it was impossible to be a lawyer, because, you know, to some extent, I never really had an option. Being a lawyer was predestined. But coming to England, or moving to England and studying there and training there, without many Black role models, although there were some. And when I was studying in the sort of in the late 90s, rather than in the early noughties, you know, you have some high flyers like Courtney Griffiths and Leslie Thomas, who are quite household names. They certainly have celebrity status now, and they were big. They were making big waves, but they were also quite out of reach. They were stratospheric, and, you know, in a sort of similar way to what Usman is now. You know, they have a massive list of accolades, and unless you met them and realized how down to earth and reasonable they were, you'd think that they were out of reach. You think that they were beyond you. But it wasn't until I could meet them and until I met other Black lawyers, and certainly I'd say Asian lawyers in particular, because just through coincidence, that's who I could be instructing a lot. I found a lot in common. I found that their struggles against structural issues within the profession were similar, and they were real, and that by coalescing and by coordinating efforts, that's how we were able to overcome things. That's how we were able to take a stand and be seen and be visible and be recognized by the law society, by the profession. So, I think, Lynette, I think you've taken us down a path that, yeah, I would love to spend another 6 hours exploring, because it's very, very real how we treat ethnicity, how we talk about ethnicity, and how we self-identify ethnically. The state we're in, the place we're in, where we're trying to ensure inclusion, puts us in the middle of that discussion about why we wanted to see Black or Asian or other minority ethnic role models. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to people to see themselves through whatever characteristics they have in their role models? What is a role model? And it does matter that people see themselves in role models, but I think, as you say, it goes far beyond simply the color, the texture of your skin, and it has certainly mattered to me, probably a lot more than I know. And it very much matters to me that, you know, now that I'm slightly more senior in my profession, I am, you know, I have to be a steward to other people coming into the profession. And I think I'm at that point where those two meet. So I wouldn't like to go any longer. Thanks, Usman.
Thanks, sure. I'm just going to introduce Emma, who has joined us. So Emma, could you say hello?
Hi, sorry, apologies for being late, everybody. Hi.
Yeah, so this is Emma Smith, Inclusion and Wellbeing Manager at Burness Paul. We've spoken a little bit about role models at the start of the profession. I had one question which I was going to ask, I think start with Kerry. Do you think that universities need to do more to help promote positive role models from kind of ethnic minority communities? And that means also, for instance, hiring more lecturers, tutors from those backgrounds, so that students coming up see visible role models in senior positions, even within the law school. I can say that from my own experience that I never had a lecturer or a tutor that was not white, or from any other back, and as such, I didn't really see any, and that, at least for my mind, was the first image I had of the legal profession. So in your view, do you think universities need to do a little bit more on that front?
Thanks, Usman. I think you answered that question better than I could. I think the answer has to be yes, given that is your experience, and I suspect the experience of other people coming through. Certainly my personal view. Disclaimer, sorry, such a lawyer thing to do, in that I'm not involved in kind of high level recruitment at the university, but from my own personal experience, I've sat on lots of panels for presentations, and I'm also involved in recruiting for diploma tutors at Glasgow. I've sat in a few presentations recently, and I would say there were very, very few people who were not white who were going for those jobs. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what the university could or should be doing to try and promote that, but I think if there's something we can do, we absolutely should be doing it, because I think it's very important. On the diploma, we do have a fairly diverse spread of tutors, but I think it could be more diverse. I would like it to be so. And I would also like to have more of our tutors become mentors. You mentioned at the beginning, Usman, that you've been involved through Glasgow with mentoring some of our students, and I'm very keen to try and promote diversity among our mentors as well for those students. So I think a long-winded way of saying absolutely and yes. And once again, I'm open to hearing, I suppose, suggestions and ideas from people on how we should or could be doing that, because I'd certainly be keen to promote it.
Does anybody else want to come in on that? Or I've got a related question around universities. Should I move on to that?
If I may come in to just what Carrie said. Carrie, I think that what you're saying is completely, I'm completely on board with that. But a point to take forward is that in terms of mentorship, it doesn't exactly have to be someone of African heritage mentoring a student of African heritage. It can be anybody. It's just making that connection within the profession, that the lack of numbers means that there's less opportunity for somebody from an ethnic minority to be able to make that connection. So if you can just connect the students with a mentor within the profession, regardless of their background, then within making that relationship, they can share their own struggles and individual struggles and the barriers that they face and have help in that way. So it doesn't necessarily, you can do so now with the tutors that you have. So yeah, just go for it.
Thanks, Lynette. We do have a mentoring scheme, so that's really interesting and helpful feedback from you to say that from your perspective, it doesn't matter so long as it is a mentor, and that's something that we are doing and will continue to do. So thank you for that.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I'm a student. Is that okay?
Yes, I was going to take questions at the end, but if you want to come in at the moment, or if you want to type your question.
Okay, it wasn't really a question. Okay, I'll type it in. Okay,
thanks. I was going to then, just on the question of universities, I'm going to move on to the traineeship hunt, the elusive traineeship hunt that is for many students. First question. Should universities be doing more in the degree to prepare law students for the traineeship hunts? The reason I asked that question is, on one view, people say, well, the degree is a degree. It's not. The purpose of the degree is to teach you the academic side of law. But another view is, well, it's a vocational degree, and it really should be preparing you for practice. And we all know how difficult it is to get traineeships. And the earlier you start, the better. And at least my experience is a lot of students from ethnic minority backgrounds, they focus on the degree, they get to third, fourth year, they've done well, then they start thinking about the degree, and by that stage, many of the firms have already hired from the summer placements. So the question is, and I think there's many people on the panel that can cover this, but can or should universities be doing more on the degree to prepare students for the traineeship hunts? Who wants to come in?
I can jump in there. I think yes. And I think it's more focusing on perhaps practical workshops in terms of building upon emotional intelligence. For example, how to build resilience, how to manage high expectations, how to manage stress. And I think these are skills that we all need as lawyers, but it's not skills that are focused in the diploma or during your LLB. And I think that perhaps if we're able to have these workshops and start teaching students these skills, then it prepares them for the challenges ahead. For example, finding a traineeship, finding an NQ job, managing expectations. So yeah, I definitely think that perhaps the universities, especially LLB degrees, need to focus on really the emotional intelligence skills that are required as being a solicitor.
Can I ask a question there? Sorry to jump in. A couple of years ago, we had an initiative on the diploma at Glasgow where we ran workshops on those very things, Amina, because we were really keen to champion. We had one on managing stress, and the take-up was so low. And we tried to time it at a perfect time when people were on campus, and we thought it was a really great, they could pop in over lunch. And the take-up just wasn't that great. And what do you think we were doing wrong? We had a speaker in. Do you think we needed to be more interactive? Do you think time of day? Do you think it should be online? Just sort of practical ideas, because it just didn't really work for us.
Was it a mandatory course?
No, it was optional.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to when, so I think if I was in the diploma at university, if it wasn't mandatory, that's probably why a lot of students wouldn't have went to it. Honestly speaking, it's probably just like, well, if I don't need to go, I'm not going to go. I think you need to make it mandatory. And I think only until you've had those classes, you've been able to learn, then you'll really see the benefit of it. That's just my opinion. I don't know if that everyone else thinks like that, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah. No, I think you're maybe right. I'll blame you when we introduce a new mandatory course. But no, that's like a helpful tip. Thank you.
Who else wants to come in on the question?
Yeah, just to add on to what Amina said, I would say that in the last year, I've been able to attend and access more events than I have in the whole of my degree because of the limitations of being able to travel to travel to the firms, to travel to the different cities that they're holding their open days, to travel to the different universities. So in terms of access, I do think that having the option to have it online does really open up for more people to be available to attend.
I think I've certainly seen that with the virtual events that have been organised, even from SEMLA over the pandemic, that turnout has been 2-3-fold what it was when it was in-person events, just because it's much easier to log in. Anybody else want to come in on the university question, or should we move to law firms?
I would just have, sorry, my screen is frozen a bit, so hopefully you can see me and hear me. But just to sort of add to what Amina's saying around workshops and things on emotional intelligence, we have found sort of, as I don't know we're going to come on to talk about it, but since we've sort of started using contextual recruitment, and since our candidate pool has opened up, that quite often what we're seeing is that candidates who maybe are first generation university, who maybe haven't had those role models previously, aren't really aware of how the sort of application process works, and that a lot of firms recruit from summer schemes. I mean, I think that ties into what sort of Usman you're saying about people kind of crack on with their degree and then get to 3rd and 4th year and start thinking about these things, and by that point it's a bit late. And I think there's maybe a role that, and some universities, do this, I'm not putting a blanket on it, but just preparation around things like aptitude testing, and just a bit more around the actual sort of route to a traineeship could be potentially beneficial.
Yes, I think certainly from my experience, having spoken to numerous students, they don't really appreciate at the start of the degree that in your first year, in your second year, you really need to start building the skill sets and the CV to be able to make your application for your summer placements. And at least in terms of how the bigger commercial firms, how important that route is. And if you don't get a summer placement there, that then often serves, it makes it much more difficult to get a traineeship at that firm. I was going to move on to just on that topic. One interesting piece of data I see in the legal profession is that nearly 14% of all LLB students are from an ethnic minority background. And I appreciate that includes those that are coming to Scotland to study, but 14%. And the largest 30 firms in Scotland take nearly 40% of all trainees. However, I've routinely heard from those firms that they struggle to attract applications from ethnic minority students. Why do you think that is? And I'll maybe start with Emma on that, because in your role, I guess you've had to think about that question.
Yeah, and I think we've definitely seen an uplift in numbers of applications. I think it's been difficult up to now to sort of, when we've not had those kind of benchmarks, to know if we're attracting, you know, a kind of representative amount of applicants or if underrepresented. I think partly it goes back to what we were just saying around that education piece as to what's required for applying for a summer scheme placement, confidence around things like aptitude testing, and just having those positive role models to kind of help people through that process. It's difficult to say. I think it's very much tied in with, you know, that intersectionality piece. We have only just been able to start sort of tracking where applications start to fall down in our process, and I think it's really important to do that. So it's, you know, it's okay to kind of say our applications are maybe not particularly low, but at that point, is that translating into actual people coming on to the summer schemes or not? So I think that's where we need to get better. But certainly from hearing feedback from students, it is partly around just a lack of awareness that what the application process is. But yeah, I don't have the answer as to why we are not attracting people.
Who else wants to come in on that question?
I can, if that's okay. I kind of think about when I was applying for traineeships, and I think for me personally, I found that a lot of firms like to talk the big talk in terms of we love diversity, we love inclusivity, but then, you know, you do research and it's like, well, what exactly are you doing? What are you doing to help make the workplace a diverse and inclusive environment? And it then comes to, okay, I want to work for a large corporate firm, but I'm not really seeing anyone that looks like me. Unconsciously, perhaps, a lot of ethnic minority students are going to apply to firms where there is a more diverse workforce. Perhaps that's because they think that they're more likely to get the job there, and because there is someone that looks like them there. And perhaps it's also because, you know, there's someone that they can relate to. And I think that then just comes down to the fact that the larger firms are not as diverse as what they should be, and that's probably why a lot of students won't apply, or perhaps deters them from applying.
There's an interesting comment that's come up now. I'll go through the questions there in the chat, but the comment is, I think firms need to look at how they're coming across in order to attract wider applicants and be more aware of diversity. Actions are needed by firms. And that takes me to my next question, which is, what actions can law firms take to attract a more diverse pool of candidates for summer placements and traineeships?
I think I'll just jump in there, but I think exactly as people have said, doing better outreach work. And I suppose, I mean, Usman and we've talked about this, I've talked about this with many people, and, you know, the feedback is there are no, you know, it is a case of there are no people who look like me, there's nobody I can relate to. But it's a bit of chicken and egg there for us. So we have to really put in that effort to make sure that people realize that it's genuine. There's a genuine desire to have people come and work for us, and that we've got the structures in place that can provide that support, and that we are really building inclusive cultures where, you know, we're working hard to remove barriers. And I think a lot of that is down to working with organisations such as SEMLA, offering work experience and placements, and, you know, having people to come in and see and test what it's like for themselves, without it, you know, looking like a tick box exercise in terms of diversity.
Who else wants to come in on that question about what law firms could be doing more?
If I may jump in there, I think in terms of what Emma's just been saying, that coming across that genuineness, I think that aspiring solicitors are looking for a firm where they are seen as an individual. They are not seen as their heritage. They're not seen as their ethnicity only. So if firms are only saying we want diversity for diversity's sake, because if that's what's coming across, then it kind of feels that you are a tool for some kind of external performance that is going on in the profession. So I think that needs to change in that how it comes across. It might be easy to say that needs to change in how it comes across, but then how do firms do that? And I think talking one-to-one, introducing people, training, that's where we break the barriers, where you can get beyond what we see on face value, beyond the assumptions that are made on both sides. Because to be fair to law firms, a lot of students are making assumptions about law firms which need to be broken. And at the same time, it might be that the recruitment process is also making assumptions about students that also need to be broken. So the more that the law firms can connect on an individual basis with students from a wider, more diverse background, the more genuine that comes across.
Tatora, do you want to come in there? I know with your work on the racial inclusion group, I think we've been looking at this issue. So what are your thoughts around what firms should be doing more to try and broaden the recruitment pool?
Sure, and without the piece of publication, the report, just to give people a sense of it, and firms have been very much involved in this. They've been very sort of quite open and honest in discussing how they do this. Part of it is things that have been said before, you know, trying to present themselves at job fairs and in public, and etc. But they're really key identifiable issues. If you see firms that have attracted employees or staff from an ethnic minority background, then you may think, well, they probably have an inclusive culture that would allow me to be there. So firms can and should promote that. They should show that they are aware of what it takes, even if they have a smaller amount of ethnic minority staff. They should show that they're aware of that and that they're keen to address it. They have that much more ability to present themselves. Candidates can only present themselves so much, whereas firms should really be saying, look, we are about inclusion, we're not about assimilation. We would like to take people as they are, and we appreciate the diversity of this candidate pool for the qualities they bring because of that diversity. I think it's a really pragmatic point when you look at contextual recruitment and tools like that. They take characteristics that come with people from ethnic minority, characteristics that are class specific and that sort of things. And a lot of them will show that ethnic minorities are cash poor and time poor. So when they're thinking about going to summer placements to take part in summer placements, they may struggle because they just don't have the time, because they have other obligations, because they have other contexts that limit their ability to take part in these things. And firms should recognize that. They should recognize that, someone can't travel necessarily to, to all these job fairs, and they can't travel to inclusion events because they can't afford to. They can't afford to take 2 or 4 weeks out of their summer to do a placement because they actually have another job to do, to put food on the table or to keep the lights on. And recognizing things like that, and I think as Anna said much earlier on, providing direct support to say, when it comes down to it, we're not going to get you into the door if we can't physically get you in the door, and we have to know that we're serious about that. So whether it is through bursaries or through paying of interns, so people can afford to take part in these things, firms should really be saying, if we're serious about this, 1, we'll put our money where our mouth is, and 2, we will show a track record of success in this area, and appreciate very much. And this is Scotland. We're not as diverse as London, for example, but efforts can be made and have been made successfully in some ways. And they'll find friends in organizations like SEMLA, who have partnered with other organizations to introduce diversity, and SEMLA and NatWest have a very successful partnership there. Black Professionals Network in Scotland, Fair Justice System Scotland. These are organizations who are very keen to help to bridge that gap and to give people that context to say, this is how you can make it easier. You can make it possible for people to get into your firm. So I think there's a number of ways. Some of them are pragmatic, some of them are more philosophical, but I think all of those together can lead to success.
I'm conscious of the time. There's a few questions that have come up in the chat, and I'm going to try and go through 2-3 questions before we conclude. The first question I want to ask is a question about allyship, and the question is, the question will be this: what can you do to be a good ally to ethnic minority law students and lawyers? Who wants to talk about allyship?
I think
Anybody want to come in?
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it is important to educate on the barriers that people face, and have an understanding of what those barriers are and what people's experiences are, and to listen to what people are saying and educate yourself. Yeah, I just think having conversations and putting out there and having the conversations within your firms, it is our responsibility to educate on that, I think.
Yeah, I'm just going to say the same thing. Sorry, just to say, I suppose events like this are helpful where people are coming together and having a frank conversation, and those of us who have the ability to maybe put things in place are listening to what people want and need. And I think that's how you be a good ally, probably.
Tatora?
Again, without getting too philosophical, I think there's a fundamental question of motivation here. I mean, you can come across an ally, you can perform allyship, but really being an ally, or a better word, if one's available, is about recognizing that the lack of diversity and inclusion harms us all. It's there's some people who are affected by it directly, but really, where you have diversity and inclusion, there's ample evidence to show that that is the key to success. So, in recognizing that, recognize that we all have a stake in improving diversity and inclusion, and educate yourself as much as possible. Educate yourself about barriers, educate yourself about society, but really be willing as possible to engage in discussions, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. Even if you perceive yourself or you think you're perceived as having an enormous amount of privilege, you use that sense to engage in conversations, to engage in and try and understand and make yourself available for that sort of exchange, because there's a lot to learn. There's a long ways to go, and I think as Lynette said earlier, there are 2 ways of prejudice. People, from both sides can come with prejudice that are packed and unpacked. It is really important to be willing to engage, and that's and once you have that ethos, I think whatever you do thereafter, as long as it's coming from a good place, is what we want to see.
And I think from my perspective, I think that's the biggest change I've seen in the Scottish legal profession over the past few years, that we just weren't having these conversations going back 3-4 years ago. And now, at least we're having these conversations out in the open, being quite candid about where we are and what we need to do better, which I think that is usually the first point of change, is actually accepting that things need to change. So at least from my perspective, I've seen that change over the past few years.
Could I
yes.
possibly just jump in? I think we've had some feedback from work we've been doing within the society that people are worried about saying the wrong thing, you know, and inadvertently being offensive. So they tend not to then say anything rather than engaging in the conversation. So I think maybe some work around that, and kind of possibly for us to, for the society, that is, to encourage people to, you know, get involved in the discussion and to have safe spaces, and where we can all respectfully discuss issues is possibly one thing that we could be doing to help support allies, as to support the people that they, you know, Black and minority ethnic people in their workplaces, in the universities, wherever, just in society in general, really. So I hope that's helpful.
I was going to ask one final question, and that's more focused on who we're trying to help, which is ethnic minority students who are trying to access the profession. And the question is this, and this will be the final question of this discussion. What are your top tips? Let's say what is your one top tip for a law student from an ethnic minority background who is thinking about or has been applying for summer placement and traineeships? What should he or she do?
Can I jump in here?
Yes.
Yeah. Make connections within the legal system, utilize events such as this, and then reach out to people. Hey, can I connect with you? Would you be available for a chat? Because I think it's important that we underline and double underline that just because you come from a minority background doesn't mean that you have the same challenges as everyone else from the background. And I think Emma said a word that really stood out to me: intersectionality, meaning that even if you're from a minority ethnic background, that doesn't mean that's the only barrier you face. There could be other barriers, and there's crossover with different groups. So being open to the individuality and the breadth of experience of people.
Yes, I'm going to just pass that question on to others, but just coming back to that point of yours, Lynette, about intersectionality, one of the points that always shocks me is around social mobility and the intersectionality with race and ethnicity. I think there's one statistic I've seen that 40% of ethnic minority young people grow up in relative poverty in Scotland. That's 40, compared to 24% of the general population. And that puts into perspective that you can't just pigeonhole social mobility as one separate initiative from ethnicity, race and ethnicity, and then have a separate pigeonhole for issues around gender. There is a huge amount of intersectionality here. Coming back to the question for top tips for law students, who wants to go next?
I'm happy to go. Oh, unless anybody else wants to.
No, on you go, Amna.
So they might be a bit cheesy, so apologies in advance, but I would say my top 3 tips. First one, rejection isn't a reflection on your abilities, so just always bear that in mind, especially when it comes to applying for traineeships. Number 2, focus on your own timings. Just because everybody else you know is getting a traineeship, it doesn't mean that you won't get one. And number 3, just being aware that it doesn't matter where you come from, what you look like, or the colour of your skin. Everyone belongs in the legal profession.
That's a great message. Who wants to go next?
I had one, which was have the confidence that your experiences and your past are sufficient to make you a good lawyer and to belong to the legal profession. And it ties back into something that I think Tatora mentioned earlier about people might not be able to go and do these fancy vaccines for no money, so on, because they're maybe having to work to put food on the table. Those experiences are as important in moulding you as a great candidate, because you've held down a job, you're resilient, you've got all this great experience. Don't be afraid to sell that. Don't think it's all about having to go and shadow someone in a law firm for a week. It's not. Your experiences count. So have the confidence in that, I would say.
I would just, sorry, I would
on
just
you go, Emma.
I would just echo all of that, and I would just try to reassure people that, you know, if you're hesitant about applying to a firm like ours, reach out to us, talk to our graduate teams, talk to, you know, get in touch with me. We can talk you through, you know, what we do around diversity and inclusion, and give you an idea of how genuinely and passionately we care about this, and how much we are trying to change. And I probably do speak for you know, most of the law firms. We talk a lot about, we collaborate very, very well on this topic. It's probably the only topic you know, one of the only ones we collaborate on very, very well, but diversity and inclusion we do. And there's just a genuine desire to work together to open up access to the legal profession to everyone. And times have changed, recruitment processes have changed, and yeah, we just would like to speak to people. And you know, if you've got queries or worries about the application process, the selection methods, we're there to talk people through that. So you know, approach us.
Could I maybe just add to that at the Society we've got a careers and outreach team. So if you don't feel that you want to speak directly to the firm, or get in touch with our careers and outreach team, they can talk you through applications, contextualized recruitment, and various things. We've also got our own mentoring scheme. So if you wanted somebody, which is available to students as well, it's not specifically aimed at people from a minority ethnic background, but there's a wide range of people who are working as volunteering as mentors through that scheme. So you could get in contact with a mentor through that if you don't want to maybe approach somebody direct. That's a way that you can get a mentor, knowing it's somebody who's keen and ready to mentor. So anyway, just to recommend that. And we've also got an inclusion law fair tomorrow. It's still places if anybody wants to register for that. A great selection of firms are going to be represented. So that's maybe an opportunity where you can have those one-to-ones and you get in touch with firms who you might not have otherwise thought of applying for. So anyway, hope that's helpful.
Tatora, do you want to finish off? I'm conscious of the time.
Indeed, I'll be as quick as I can. It's a very cheesy one. Just develop your passion for the law. Do what you can to show that you love the law and that you've done everything you possibly can. Because you didn't get the vacation placement at Denton's doesn't mean you're not going to be a good lawyer in a number of years' time. Just give yourself the opportunity to be able to show that you love the law whenever possible.
Well, that's great advice. I'm going to wrap up the panel discussion. Can I thank all the panelists for what's been an incredibly insightful and interesting conversation. And I'm going to hand over to Brianella to close the event.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending tonight's event. We hope you have found it to be insightful and that the discussions have been thought-provoking. As committee members, we have been making notes of the outcomes from tonight's discussion, and we do intend to share these action points with our members. We'll also be doing a follow-up blog to discuss any questions that we've missed, so don't worry, if we have missed you, we will come back to you. Amina and I will also be doing a Coffee with the Committee podcast, which will be a general overview of what was discussed tonight ahead of our second roundtable event on progress. A massive thank you to our panelists and our chair, Usman. And just finally, just to note what Elaine had said, I just put a a little link into the chat there for everyone. We think that it's only fitting to mention the Law Society and celebrating their inclusion event and law fair, which will take place tomorrow. It will be via Zoom, so you can all join. I believe it's from 9 o'clock until 5. Is that right?
It's certainly all day, yes.
Yeah, it's
yes.
all day. So please feel free to join on to that. The event will feature law firms as well as organizations such as SEMLA. We will be there as well as role models in law. So yeah, go ahead and sign up and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.